We've been studying James. As you know, we have one little section here at the end of chapter 4 that we want to cover tonight. I think it's an interesting passage and a very important one. James 4, verses 13 through 17. Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a city and spend a year there and engage in business and make a profit. Yet you do not know what your life will be like tomorrow. You are a vapor that appears for a little while and then vanishes away. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and also do this or that. But as it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. Therefore, to one who knows the right thing to do and does not do it, to him it is sin. I struggled with how to title this passage or this sermon. Leaving God at church when you go to work. Living sensibly in a success-driven world. Avoiding the most common form of worldliness, arrogant independence, and self-sufficiency. To be so entirely dependent upon God for every breath you breathe and every step you take, every single day of your fleeting life, you sure are full of yourself. Or Practical Atheism 101, believing God exists, but living like He doesn't. I couldn't decide. So I defaulted to those 4 words from the text, if the Lord wills, because that really is, I think, the message, right? And the mindset that James wants us to maintain. If the Lord wills, we will live and also do this or that. This is obviously another strong rebuke. In fact, in this case, he doesn't even concede that these are believers. You'll notice the paragraph omits the usual reference, brethren, or my brethren. Here he's simply addressing you who say. The proud, self-confident boast of those who assume their every venture will succeed because they are so clever, so capable, so competent, etc. It's kind of the world we live in, frankly, isn't it? A lot of arrogant people, a lot of self-made, self-confident people who think success is simply a matter of being driven. Unsuccessful people are just lazy, that's all. They don't work hard enough. They don't try hard enough. They don't plan their work and work their plan. Failing to plan, they plan to fail. Stroll through any bookstore, especially an airport bookstore, and that's what you find on the shelves, right? Self-help, motivational books on highly successful people. We're pretty obsessed with that, aren't we, in this culture? How to succeed. And that's fair. I mean, who wants to fail? No books on that. 7 traits of highly ineffective people. So we live in this climate and this culture where the mindset is whatever it takes to succeed, you do. We're a success-driven culture, and people truly believe that's all there is to it. The difference between success and failure is self-confidence, self-discipline, a little patience, a little perseverance, and voila, the next self-made millionaire. Paul says, do not be conformed to this world. This is one of the ways we can easily be conformed to this world, isn't it? The attitude of self-reliance, self-sufficiency, autonomy, forgetting that, oh yeah, this is my Father's world. He's in charge, not me. The specific target of his rebuke is the merchant class, businessmen and women whose lives and livelihood are engrossed in commerce and trade and travel, who therefore succumb to the sin of presumptuous planning that ignores or even defies the providence of God. They make big plans but completely forget that the best laid schemes of mice and men go or gang aft agley, right? More biblically, the best laid schemes of mice and men are subject to the sovereign will of God. It's the divine will that governs the world and all our activity in it, not the human will. To think then and live and even talk like I'm the master of my fate, the captain of my soul, is total disregard for God's existence, let alone His authority. This is the pride God opposes. You remember what He said in verse 6? God is opposed to the proud. Or this is the friendship with the world, verse 4, that is hostility toward God. This is an application of that. So it extends really to all of us. All of us make plans, right? All of us work. All of us try to be successful, try to make a living. Question is, where is God in all of that? Practical atheism is a thing. Spiros Zodhiates uses that term in his book, The Patience of Hope, where he says, such practical atheism is unfortunately far more common than reasoned unbelief. And we may well wonder what the judgment of God will be upon this practical atheism that plagues the Christianity of the 20th century, as it has apparently plagued the Christian church throughout the ages. Yeah, we would never deny the existence of God, but how often do we exclude Him from our daily lives or ignore Him in our plans? So that's the pride and presumption that James is confronting here, and it's just a good reminder to us that all our plans and goals and activities and intentions are subject to God's plans and intentions and activities and goals. We should qualify every I will with if the Lord wills. Because if it isn't the Lord's will, then it ain't going to happen, is it? And you wouldn't want it to anyway if you're a believer. So we're really looking here tonight and talking about leaving room in your plans for His, or leaving room in your plans really for His providence. How do we do that? Because it's not wrong to plan, is it? The mind of man plans his way. That's normal. That's expected. The Lord directs his steps, yes, but the mind of man plans his way. It's also not wrong to succeed. It's not a sin to make a profit. And the reality is we do have a certain amount of flexibility and freedom, don't we, in where we go and what we do and how we conduct our business and how we go about our work. That's not the problem. The problem is excluding God from all of that. Thinking and talking and living and planning and doing all the things we do every single day like we are totally independent when we really are totally dependent, aren't we, on God and His existence, His grace, His provision, His guidance, His protection, His providence. So let me start with that. We're always at the mercy of the providence of God. That's the point of if the Lord wills, we will. Our plans are always tentative at best. always contingent upon the providence of God. Now, we normally express that in different terms. We might say, well, yeah, we'll be there if things work out, right? If we have time, if circumstances allow. Your child might say, hey, Daddy, can we go to the zoo tomorrow? Well, honey, maybe we'll have to wait and see. Wait and see what? If the weather permits, if time permits, if they're open, if we all want to when we get up in the morning still, if Mommy wants to. A lot of ifs there, right? And they're there because of providence. So what is providence? Deism taught that God wound the clock and walked away. That he created all this, and now he's just the bystander, watching it all run its course. Uninvolved, and maybe even indifferent. The Bible teaches just the opposite, of course, that God is directly involved in everything, in every detail, every circumstance. Nothing is left to chance or fate or luck. That God not only created everything in the universe, but he governs and rules over and sustains and directs everything in creation with absolute sovereign authority. And sometimes he does that by miraculous intervention. Sometimes miracles, where he steps in and disrupts the natural order of things and does something supernatural. But most commonly and most ordinarily, he does that by his providence, not in contrast to the natural order of things, but even more remarkably, I think, in concert with the natural order of things. The Westminster Confession said it this way: God, the great creator of all things, doth uphold, direct, dispose, and govern all creatures, actions, and things, from the greatest even to the least, by his most wise and holy providence, according to his infallible foreknowledge and the free and immutable counsel of his own will, to the praise of the glory of his wisdom, power, justice, goodness, and mercy. Another theologian, Millard Erickson, defines it this way: by providence we mean the continuing action of God by which he preserves in existence the creation which he has brought into being and guides it to his intended purposes for it. In other words, the Creator governs his creation. Is that a surprise? He ordains whatsoever comes to pass. He governs, guides, sustains, provides, directs, orchestrates everything in creation, every being, every event, every circumstance. It's not the devil in the details, it's God. For instance, God's providence controls and sustains all of nature, all of creation, the natural realm. You've read the Psalms which repeatedly affirm that, right? How he forms the clouds. He makes it rain and thunder and lightning. He supplies seed to the sower and bread to the eater. He causes the grass to grow for the cattle and vegetation for the labor of man, so that he may bring forth food from the earth. He gives to the beast its food, and to the young ravens which cry, etc., etc. God's providence controlling and sustaining all of nature. God's providence governs human history and the destiny of nations. Daniel 2:21, let the name of God be blessed forever and ever, for wisdom and power belong to him. It is he who changes the times and the epochs. He removes kings and establishes kings. Daniel 4:17, the Most High is ruler over the realm of mankind and bestows it on whomever he wishes. Bestows what? Bestows power, positions of authority. So nature, nations. Third, God's providence determines the circumstances of individual persons. Some examples. Hannah said, "The Lord kills and brings to life. He brings down to Sheol and raises up. The Lord makes poor and rich. He brings low. He also exalts." David said, "But as for me, I trust in you, O Lord. I say, you are my God. My times are in your hands." My times are in your hands. In Psalm 75:6, "For not from the east, nor from the west, nor from the desert comes exaltation, but God is judge. He puts down one and exalts another." He didn't fret over his circumstances because he knew who controlled them. And you remember the story of Esther. Mordecai said to her, "Who knows? Who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this?" That is a classic story of the providence of God. Mordecai knew that God had put her in that uncomfortable yet strategic position in that time and that place as the instrument that he would use to deliver his people. Not a miracle, providence. Same with Joseph in Egypt. Remember what he said to his brothers after the whole deal was over? "You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good." I can forgive you because now I understand what was going on. You were doing what you wanted to do, and it was evil. And at the same time, God was doing what he intended to do, and it was good. Theologians call that concurrence. And it's true, really, for all of us all the time. Paul said in Acts 17 that God has made from one every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined their appointed times and the boundaries of their habitation, so that we may seek him and find him, though he's not far from any one of us. Paul there acknowledging how God providentially determines when we live and how long we live and where we live and why we live. So nature, nations, individuals. Not only that, God's providence decides the accidents, the incidental things, the freak things, the chance things, the luck things, the Mother Nature things, the acts of God things. The accidental events that happen in life. Classic illustration of that, 1 Kings 22. The prophet Micah had warned King Ahab not to go up against the Arameans. Things would not go well, but he was arrogant, decided to do so anyway, and disguised himself as a common soldier so they wouldn't automatically, target him, because the king was always sort of set apart and in all his pomp and circumstance. So he disguised himself as a common soldier. He's out with the other soldiers on the battlefield. Well, a certain Aramean drew his bow at random and fired into the midst of the warriors on the battlefield. Guess what happened? The arrow randomly shot into the air, struck, guess who? King Ahab. Guess where? A joint in his armor, so that he died. Lucky shot? Freak accident? No, God's providence controlling, random arrows. No accidents in God's universe. And then, fifthly, God's providence even regulates the sinful actions of his creatures, even the sinful things people do. Greatest illustration of that being the death of Christ. Let's face it, greatest sin of mankind is murdering Jesus. How does Peter describe that in Acts 2? Delivered up by the predetermined plan and foreknowledge of God, you nailed to a cross by the hands of godless men and put him to death. There's that concurrence again. Their evil, sinful actions fulfilling God's perfect, good, eternal plan. And that's how it works. That's how providence works. It's working like that all the time. Even as we freely do what we choose to do, even when it's evil, even when it's sinful, God still accomplishes his purposes and works all things together for our good and his glory. And he does that so effortlessly and so seamlessly, we don't even notice. We don't even see that that's what's going on. You would never know that. But behind everything that happens, there's the invisible hand of providence at work. And so you can see how ludicrous, how blasphemous it is to boast about all that we are going to do as if we're independent, autonomous, sovereign beings who control our own destiny and can do anything we want, anytime we want. Far from it. So let me unpack the principles that I think we find here for making plans without being presumptuous, making plans that recognize and humbly accept and welcome the providence of God at work in our world, how to leave room for God's providence in your plans. Number one, make plans that are consistent with the biblical view of work and wealth. Verse 13, come now you who say today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a city and spend a year there and engage in business and make a profit. On how many levels is that wrong? For one, it's atheistic. Have you noticed? It leaves God out. Great plan. Except, where's, God? You talk like God doesn't even exist. Are you a Christian or not? For two, it's materialistic. The whole plan centers around what? What's the bottom line? The bottom line, making money. Where we go, when we go, how long we stay, what we do is all governed by one single ambition of making a profit. Again, James talked about worldliness in verse 4. This is just another expression of that. You act and talk and live and plan just like everyone else in the world. Driven by the same purpose, the same passion, the same priorities, and God is nowhere to be found in any of it. It's atheistic, materialistic. We can also assume it's hedonistic. In verse 3, he said, you ask with wrong motives so that you may spend it on your pleasures. And so if that was the motive in their prayer, we can assume that's probably the same motive in their work. So the whole scheme is a very atheistic, materialistic, hedonistic approach to life, isn't it? No different than unbelievers. And you kind of have to wonder what happened. What happened? If you think about it, this is essentially the same basic congregation that was formed on the day of Pentecost in Acts 2. That's who these people are. The first church in Jerusalem, where in Acts 2 they're described as excessively generous and sacrificial, remember, selling their property and possessions and sharing them with all as anyone might have need. Here, they just seem to be driven by greed. What happened? In Acts, they were very deliberately making all these plans to go and make disciples. Now, they're very elaborately making all these plans to go and make a profit. Kind of lost sight of their purpose, haven't they? Have we? Why do we work? Why do we make money? Are our motives really any different than everybody else in the world? Are we driven by greed? Are we driven by fear and anxiety about the future? Are we driven by self-indulgence, covetousness, envy, pride, ego, pleasure? Why do you work? Someone says to make a living. Fine. Why are you living? Because those should connect, right? Shouldn't our purpose for working be consistent with our purpose for living? But if you ask a Christian, what's your purpose in life? Most Christians will answer that the right way. Well, the purpose of my life is to glorify God, exalt Christ, to know God and make Him known, spread the gospel, build up the church. I'll accept that answer. Well, let me ask you this. Why do you work? I-O, so off to work I go. Disconnect. How can there be a disconnection between our purpose for living in this world as a Christian and our purpose for working in this world as a Christian? Well, we compartmentalize, don't we? That's what's going on here. They can talk like they're talking here in verse 13 because they compartmentalize. Work is over here, God is over there. We segregate the spiritual and the secular. And work belongs to the secular. And by the way, that's the real world. This isn't. And you have no idea what it's like in the real world. It's dog eat dog out there. You're either the hammer or the nail, the bird or the worm. And you learn to play by the rules of the game. It's survival of the fittest, kill or be killed, eat or be eaten. So we live and act and talk like the world because that's the only way to succeed in the world. It's business. You've compartmentalized, haven't you, that part of your life. You can't do that. To be a Christian is to bring everything in your life under the authority of Christ. There are no compartments, God's business, my business. Your whole life now is to be lived for the glory of God, the gospel, the good of others. So learning to think that way, work is a way for you to participate in God's mission in the world. It's the means He's given you to do that, of being salt and light, doing good, serving others, exalting Christ, proclaiming the gospel. Sure, it's a way to earn a living. Whoever will not work, neither let him eat. You work to put bread on the table and pay the bills and provide for your own and share with those who have need. But the purpose of your life is to glorify God and serve others. The purpose of your work needs to correspond to that. So you have to have a biblical view of work and of money. It's not a separate category from the rest of my life. It's an essential part of our calling as Christians in this world to do all things to the glory of God. Colossians 3:23, whatever you do, do your work heartily as for the Lord rather than for men, knowing that from the Lord you'll receive the reward of the inheritance. It is the Lord Christ whom you serve. What a great verse, right? Whatever you do, you're doing it for the Lord. You say, don't we work to make money? Sure. And Proverbs 14:23 says, in all labor there's profit. But Proverbs 23:4 says, do not weary yourself to gain wealth. Cease from your consideration of it. Getting rich isn't the ambition. If we have food and clothing, with these we shall be content. Our ambition is to please God, to serve Christ, to be a blessing to others, to see the gospel spread, to make disciples. Don't compartmentalize. Let your purpose in life be your purpose in work. Secondly, make plans that are conscious of the brevity and uncertainty of life. This is James's answer to those who say, verse 14, you do not know what your life will be like tomorrow. You're just a vapor that appears for a little while and then vanishes away. So far from being sovereign over the circumstances of your life for the next year, you don't even know what your life will be like Monday. John Calvin wrote, James roused the stupidity of those who disregarded God's providence and claimed for themselves a whole year, though they had not even a single moment in their own power. You make all these plans, James is saying, as if you know what the weather will be like, what the roads will be like, what the economy will be like, what the world will be like. You don't even know what your life will be like tomorrow. Interesting, right? Even the one thing over which you have control, you don't have control. You don't know. You see that, verse 14? You do not know. How can you be so arrogant when you are so ignorant? You don't know. There's not a person in this room who can say with certainty what life has in store for them tomorrow. That's why Proverbs 27:1 warns, do not boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what a day may bring forth. You speak so confidently about what you're going to do for the next year, you don't even know if you'll have the next day. This reminds us of Luke 12, right? The man who reasoned to himself, what shall I do since I have no place to store my crops? And he said, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build larger ones, and there I'll store all my grain and my goods, and I'll say to my soul, soul, you have many goods laid up for many years to come. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry. God said to him, you fool, this very night your soul is required of you, and now who will own what you have prepared? So is the man who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. That's a lot of people, man. They got it all figured out, don't they? They got it all figured out, except the you don't know what your life will be like tomorrow part. Here's what you do know. Are you ready for this? You, look at it, are a vapor. You are a vapor that appears for a little while and then vanishes away. So that's something. You don't know what your life will be like, but you know it'll be what? Short. Very short. Scripture uses a number of figures like this to visualize that, the transitory and unstable nature of human existence, the brevity of life. The evening shadow, a mere breath, a cloud, withering grass, a boat moving down river, a runner passing by, an eagle swooping down on its prey. Here the word vapor, like a puff of smoke, a wisp of cloud, steam from the tea kettle, the morning fog, your breath on a cold day, a plate of cookies, here 1 minute, gone the next. Now you see it, now you don't. What's he saying to us? Come on, people, wake up. Don't live in denial. Don't sit there as you're watching TV and say, that happens to those people. It happens to all people. And the point is not to send us into a spiral of depression. The point is to sober you up to the reality of the brevity and uncertainty of life so that you stop talking like you're the captain of your own fate, the master of your own destiny, and have the world by the tail. Stop and think about your life and how short it is and how fast it goes and what you want your puff to count for. Make plans that are consistent with the biblical purpose of work and wealth. Make plans that are conscious of the brevity and uncertainty of life. Let me give you the next three really quickly. 3, make plans that are conditioned on the Lord's sovereign will. Verse 15, instead, say, or you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will actually live, and then also maybe do this or that. Paul modeled this. There's other examples. Obviously, Jesus modeled this. His whole life was about doing the Father's will, not getting distracted by anything that would derail him from that. But Paul modeled this. A number of places he says this phrase, and it's, I think, a great example for us, a great mindset for us to observe. Leaving the Ephesian elders, he said, I will return to you again if God wills. That's what James is talking about here. Not that you always tack that on at the end to somehow sanctify your plan, but that you truly live that way and talk that way and plan that way. All my plans are conditional, contingent on what God wills. And how will I know if He wills? If it happens, how will I know if it's His will for me to return to you again when I return to you again? To the Corinthians, he said, I'll come to you soon if the Lord wills. I hope to remain with you for some time if the Lord permits. His plans were always conditional. So are mine, so are yours, right? So we should talk like it. It's one of the old timers used to say, Lord willing and the creek don't rise. You ever heard that? Lord willing and the creek don't rise. What do they mean? There's a lot of variables that we don't control, and we can say we're going to do this, that, or the other, but we may not be able to. If the Lord wills. That's not a token thing we say. We say it because it's true, and we know it's true, and we believe it's true, and we want to affirm our submission to that truth. Unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. Right? Unless the Lord guards the city, the watchmen keep awake in vain. The horse is prepared for battle, but victory belongs to the Lord. Whether we win or not is in the Lord's hands, not how good a horse you have prepared. Nothing we plan to do will ever succeed unless the Lord wills, and why would we want it to, right? 4, make plans that are centered around bringing glory to God. Verse 16, but as it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. The such is emphatic here. All such boasting is evil. Not all boasting is evil. Right? Let him who boasts boast in the Lord. That's not evil. But this is evil. Boasting in your arrogance. It's really an interesting phrase. It's like he's saying you're boasting in your boasting. You're arrogant about being arrogant. Not to single them out, but it seems like you see this a lot with athletes, right? They're confident in their confidence, if nothing else. All such boasting is evil. Boasting in their accomplishments, their abilities, their success. It's all self-glory. That's evil. So instead, you ought to boast in the Lord, right? You ought to focus on His glory and giving Him the glory for all that's accomplished, that He accomplishes in your life. Whether you eat or drink, right? Even the most mundane things that we do day in and day out, do all to the glory of God. So we need to make plans with that goal and that purpose in mind, to be glorifying to God, and then make plans, fifthly, that are committed to doing what's right, right? Verse 17, therefore to the one who knows the right thing to do and does not do it, to him it is sin. It seems like kind of an abrupt way to end, almost a change of subject, but it really is a great way to summarize the whole discussion. It simplifies everything. In all your planning, don't neglect to do the one thing you're always supposed to do, which is what? The right thing. It's always right to do what's right. So if you really want a fail-proof plan, that's your plan. I'm just always going to do what's right. That's what he's saying. You already know you ought to do that, so just do that. And the fact is, you can make all these elaborate plans, plan out your day and plan out your week and plan out your calendar year, and yet the fact is you will always end up in the right place if you just do what's right every single day. So just commit yourself to that. Commit yourself to living in obedience to the revealed will of God and His Word. When I was in college, one man that greatly influenced me would make this statement from time to time, and it stuck with me. It's something of all the things he taught us and all the things he said that I remember vividly. It stuck out to me at the moment he said it, and I've never forgotten it since. There's two kinds of Christians. Those who are constantly seeking or looking for God's will, and those that are just doing it day by day by day. Man, that resonated with me, and it stuck. And I needed to hear that. I'm not one of those guys. I'm not smart enough to plan out my whole life. Brad, what's on your day timer? I don't have a day timer. I don't set a timer unless I'm cooking something in the oven. I'm just not one of those guys. I'm a plotter. I'm a one thing at a time, one day at a time kind of person. That's all we have anyway. In other words, for all the Lord's will that we may not know, we know it's His will for us to walk humbly with your God, trust Him with all your heart, right? Love him with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Obey him in all your ways. Acknowledge him, etc. So probably just do that. Just do that. Anyway, I think helpful reminder for me, hope it is for you. Don't be a practical atheist. Don't leave God at church. Don't be conformed to this world. God has a plan, and God is working his plan, and his plan for my life fits into that plan, and only as I surrender my life to his plan will my plan work. Anyway, so live and think and talk and plan like God is in control, not me, and I'm 100% on board with that. I want nothing more in my life anyway, ever, than his will to be done. So learn to say that, and not just as a pious platitude, but as the conscious attitude of your heart. If the Lord wills, we will live and also do this or that. Let's pray. Father, it is our will that your will be done. We want nothing more than what you want. Your will alone is that which is good and acceptable and perfect. And that's what we want for our lives. That's what we want for each other. So help us to think that way, to pray that way, to talk that way, to be careful that we're not arrogant and boastful in the way we talk about our plans, our future. We don't know. We don't know what the future holds. We know who holds it. May we be content with that, and may we be consumed with doing the things that we know we ought to be doing day by day by day, and then trusting you for tomorrow. I pray this in Christ's name. Amen.